Do you want to know how to use podcasts for business? You can't even imagine how much it will benefit you. It gives so many opportunities that you even didn't think about. I'm absolutely passionate about it and hope to share some of that passion with you today. I'll touch on the first benefit very quickly. It's you can earn money with the podcast through the advertising someone's product, selling yours, or include the affiliate links into the podcast show notes. For some people, podcasts become an extra passive income stream. However, unless you have an already established brand or a big community, it will take time to get to the point when you earn a decent amount of money from ads on a podcast. For your references, a number of subscribers or followers doesn't really matter if you want to make money with the podcast ads. You count the downloads of the episodes. Nowadays, you can start looking for podcast sponsorships once you hit 5,000 downloads per episode, and on average, you can get $100 for it. And with 10,000 downloads per episode, you can start generating a full-time income from your podcast. But as I said, it will take time while you get there. So I wouldn't recommend setting your main podcast goal as making money. Leave it as a nice benefit. However, there are more opportunities that creating your own podcast will give you. When you explore the ways of how to use a podcast for business, you may want to show your expertise there so you can get more clients. Many service providers have a podcast around their services. If you are a coach or consultant, you can show your work in each episode, coach people on your podcast, or consult them on your subject. It's a perfect place to demonstrate how you work. Your audience will resonate with people you coach, and also if potential client will ask about your work, you can always share with them some of your coaching sessions related to their problems. Another way to get more clients is to fill your episodes with practical tips around your expertise. Let's say you specialize in customer service. Then you do solo episodes and share tips on how to improve customer service. You can also tell stories about your previous work or talk about case studies of how other companies implemented that. When you do that, people start seeing you as an authority and you build trust in your niche. There is also an interesting story. One of my fellow podcasters had a podcast about the city where he lived. He interviewed people who lived there for a long time, building up their personal stories. They were just ordinary people with their life stories related to the city, how it was built and developed. So after some time, people started reaching out to him, asking to give a tour around the city. He built his side business by being a guide in his hometown. But what if you're still in the process of becoming an expert and you try yourself online, you start building your online presence? Then creating a podcast is also an amazing tool to begin with because it's so easy to start with and you have and know everything for that. Here's the thing. I've tried creating all forms of content, and for a long time, I thought that blogging is the best of all. Because years ago, I was a web designer, created websites, and knew how to optimize the sites for SEO to get on the first page of Google. I've done it so many times, earned money from the advertising on the sites which I had in Russian, and when I switched to publishing in English, I kept doing the same. In the beginning, it was difficult as English is not my native language, but then I got the skills to write good enough blog posts, whether it's a short article or a detailed guide to something. But then the truth is that I hate writing. In 5 minutes, I sit to write something, I start seeing all the dirt around that I had to clean up right away. I make 2-3 cups of tea and procrastinate in all possible ways until I push myself to finally finish the post. Video is fun, but needs some more effort to produce. While for the podcast, all you need is a good mic and basic editing skills to start. You even don't need to be an expert in something. Just find the one and ask the questions that are interesting to you. Often, you as a host is a representative of your audience, so it's easier to find what would be remarkable for your listeners. There are two ways to do that. One is you come up with a topic for your guest and write 7 to 10 questions that you may ask about this topic. This is what I do. And I often ask what I'm personally interested in, what I think also will benefit my audience. The second way is even more simple. You set the main theme for your podcast and have a set of general questions you ask every guest. That can be something about their career, area of specialization, or life. When you're a podcast host, then your castle, your rules. You can make it whatever you want to be. The fourth way of how to use a podcast for business is one of my favorites. And I even didn't expect it when I started a podcast. It's like a VIP card. You have access to the interesting, smart, successful people in your industry. When you have a podcast, you become a media channel where you are kind of a hub for the knowledge where everyone wins. You interview someone, they have a chance to share the message and knowledge with your audience. Your audience gets quality content and learns from them, and so you do. When I started Marketing for Creatives podcast, I didn't understand how powerful it is. I thought it would be just my way to create content and hang out with cool people. But then almost every person who I interviewed was kind of a mentor for me. Because first, I had an opportunity to ask the questions that I wanted to get the answers to. And also, often we had another short chat with a guest after the interview when I asked more personal questions. They just guided me in business. For 1 year of interviewing those people, I learned more than for 6 years of getting my 2 degrees. When I understood how amazing that is, then when I had a question about my business or what to do next, all I had to do is to find one of the top experts in my industry or on the topic I'm interested in and interview him or her. And it blows out my mind how easy it is to reach out to them. I would never talk to most of them if I wouldn't have a podcast. And here's the fifth way of how to use a podcast for business. Having a podcast exponentially grows your brand awareness and opens up more opportunities. Let's start with that having a podcast itself gives you the sort of authority status. The more you are into that game, the more well-known guests you bring, the more your status has grown up. You build your audience, people get familiar to you, and then they start looking at you as an expert. Or if you've been an expert already, then you become even more known. If your podcast is something that you're proud of, talk about it. Because there were people who listened to my podcast or just knew about it, and because of that, I had the opportunity to speak at the conferences. For example, one of them was a big international forum with many people from different countries. Diplomats, United Nations representatives, etc. So many people that I couldn't even imagine to meet in person. I had an imposter syndrome there. Like, who am I to be there? It also got me an opportunity to give a TEDx talk. It actually worked from several perspectives. First, I had it in my dream list to give a TEDx talk. And when I understood the power of having a podcast, guess what I did? I just had to find one of the best who could guide me on how to do that. So I reached out to Thompson Webster, who for 4 years was an executive producer of one of the oldest and one of the largest TEDx talk events in the world. And now she teaches people how to write and give TEDx talks. I'll put a link to the podcast episode that we had with Thompson in the description below, so you can also check it out. After that interview, I reached out to local TEDx organizers. Of course, mentioning that I'm a podcast host. Well, I had other achievements and experience, but when you pitch people for something like being a TEDx speaker, you show all the best. A year after, I gave a TEDx talk. I didn't think I would do it yet if I wouldn't have a podcast and didn't look for those opportunities. And if you want to become a TEDx speaker, click on that card where I go through the details on how you can do that. And that were just a few benefits of having a podcast. When I started it, I interviewed most of my favorite authors, speakers, and interesting people from the internet that I followed. I guarantee you that you will meet many amazing people who you would never had a chance to meet in person. So here are my 5 top ways of how to use a podcast for business. Most of them are about how it benefits you as a podcast host. But also, when you find your niche, you will start getting feedback from your listeners saying how helpful it was for them too. Question: if you didn't start a podcast yet, tell me in the comments what doubts you still have. I'd like to support you. And check this video. There are more tips that will help you to build a podcast that will benefit your business.